Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome to an exciting Monday. I'm still sick, but I'm still here to give you these videos explaining things. So it's again Magic Monday, so what am I going to talk about? I wanted to talk about creature abilities. Now, a lot of these creatures you have might have one-word abilities, which they may or may not explain how they work on it. Some of them could be Trample, First Strike, Flying. There could be more interesting ones like Double Strike, Death Touch, Lifelink. The words go on. There's this huge list of abilities, and they're not just creature abilities. There's abilities which are on a lot of different cards, which when you see them, you're not necessarily going to know what they are right away. Sometimes they explain them on cards, sometimes they don't. There are certain abilities which have been around so long, they just don't mention what they do anymore. There's no reason to. People should know what they are. But you as a beginner, maybe you don't. Going through the rules, you can go over them, you can learn them all, but I wanted to start and explain them to you one by one, give you an idea how they work, what they all mean, and refine what the rules basically say about them. So I decided to start at the beginning. I've chosen 5 abilities, and I'm going to do 5 each time. Today's 5 started in the first set of Magic. They were in Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited. Now, a little history lesson, because I will talk about these again. Alpha and Beta were the sort of experimental versions of Magic. Unlimited was when their first major release was. You have to remember, video games go through an alpha build, a beta build. They have their pre-releases where they're getting tested out by the public or by game testers, where they work out a lot of the bugs. That was the original builds. So Unlimited was the first major actual release of Magic. And I started around the time that Beta ended and Unlimited really started. So most of my cards at that time were Unlimited. I had very few Beta cards. That's when I started. So, here's 5 abilities which originated then. The first one I'm going to talk about, Trample. Trample is probably one of the most common abilities, and it appears across pretty much every color. Now granted, they show up in colors like red and green a lot more, especially green. Green and Trample sort of go hand in foot, but it showed up in a lot of other colors. You can find an example of Trample in pretty much every color. It's just one of those things that's been common enough. Now, what is Trample? Trample is very easy to explain. Trample is an ability which activates when you're attacking. So let's say I attack with my Trample creature. Now, we're going to give some examples here. My Trample creature is a 4/4, meaning it can deal 4 damage, take 4 damage. But we're really caring about the dealing 4 damage right now. It doesn't matter how much my creature takes. It matters how much my opponent's creatures take. Now, if my 4/4 doesn't have Trample, and my opponent blocks with a 2/2, my creature deals 4 to his creature deals 2 to my creature. My creature having 4 toughness, it lives. His creature having 2 takes 4 damage, it dies. What does Trample mean? If my creature had Trample, I would look at that number, 2. I would subtract that 2 from my 4. So now I have this 2 extra damage that's floating around. Where does it go? Well, you can block with more than one creature. That's something I didn't mention before. I apologize. It's an important thing. I will have an annotation in the previous video. But you can block with more than one creature. I could have a second creature, which could take 2. Of course, I'll go into combat details a little better in another video, so you understand a lot more of these concepts. But let's just say, for now, one-on-one creatures, that 2 extra damage goes to my opponent, because he could not absorb it with creatures. So it tramples over his creature, or creatures. That's what Trample is. Any damage that's not absorbed by the defending creatures goes over to the defending player. So a big creature that might have like an 8/8 Trample, if you don't block with enough creatures to absorb that 8 damage, anything left over goes to you. That's Trample. It's as simple as that. It's just a way that you have to worry about some excess damage going to you if either you're defending against it or you're using it against an opponent and they're defending against it. They might have to worry about it. I mean, again, Trample has showed up in pretty much every color. You can find a Trample example. They happen. It is one of the I would say it's the second most common one, which brings us to the next one I want to talk about. Probably the most common ability there is, flying. Flying is the most common ability you have in Magic. Every color has flying. White and blue have the most flying. Green, red, black, they all have some flying too. Black has things like bats and vampires which fly. Red has dragons. Green, you have some insects. That's pretty much the extent of green. Green, unfortunately, has the least amount of flying. Doesn't mean it's not there, but, again, it's common across all the colors and is the most common ability. What does flying mean? Flying only comes into play when I'm attacking. It's another attacking ability. So, when I attack with a flying creature, it can only be blocked by a creature with flying. That's it. A creature without flying can't block it. Now, my flying creature, it could block whatever. It doesn't prevent you from blocking because it's flying. It can still block a creature that doesn't have flying. But the reverse. A creature with flying can only be blocked by a creature with flying. It's as simple as that. So, if you build a deck around flying and your opponent doesn't have flying, they're not going to be able to block you. Then again, most flying creatures tend to be on the smaller side than most land creatures, so it's a trade-off. Maybe I can get a lot of small damage against you, but I don't have a lot of ability to block your creatures. That's the sort of trade-off you have to think about. Now granted, there are big flying things, like dragons, angels, and demons tend to be very big creatures, and a lot of them fly. But they're more an exception to the rule. There are a lot of small birds and small creatures that fly around. But that's flying. Now I did want to talk to you about a countermand to flying that shows up primarily in green. Reach. Reach is something that showed up in green because it doesn't have a lot of flying. It's the ability to block something with flying. If I have a creature with reach, then I can block something with flying. It's like that. It's my ability that maybe my creature doesn't fly, it can still block as if it had flying. It means that my creature, it can be blocked like normal when it attacks. Nothing special with attacking. It's a purely defensive ability. Now reach, you're going to find it mostly on big spiders, but it does show up on other creatures too. Spiders were the first place it showed up on. And it is one of the first abilities I'm going to mention that started out being described rather than with a single word. Trample and flying, they both had their words on the cards in Unlimited. Reach didn't have itself written down as a single word for some time. It was developed later on. It originally just said, this creature can block creatures as though it had flying. So, reach. Okay, ability number 4. First Strike. What does First Strike mean? This is again an offensive ability rather than a defensive ability, meaning I'm going to be using it when I'm attacking. What First Strike means is, let's say I'm attacking with my 1/1 First Strike. Your opponent has a 1/1. He wants to block my First Strike. Now what happens? Now if my creature didn't have First Strike, they would deal their damage to each other at the same time. Each one would deal 1 to the other. They would both die. My First Strike creature, because it has First Strike, says, I deal my 1 damage first. So my 1 damage is dealt. Does it kill my opponent's creature? Oh, it does. Then my creature doesn't take the damage. That's what First Strike means. Your creature gets the first hit in it. And if it kills its opponent, it's safe. It doesn't get attacked back. It gets that opportunity to kill its opponent before it can get hurt. That's all that First Strike is. It's a good ability again. All these abilities are very good, and combinations of abilities really help out a lot. Talking about First Strike, it shows up in red and white more than anything, though it has shown up in some of the other colors, black primarily. Blue and green, it is not something that traditionally shows up in blue and green. It's not a traditional ability for them. Granted, with the card selection, usually you can say some of these older abilities and you can find something in there that has that ability. But again, its primary location is white and red with some black too. Alright, so what's the last one I'm going to talk about today? I wanted to talk about a more unusual one. Land walking. Ooh, What the heck is that? It's a very interesting ability, and it doesn't show up a lot. It showed up in this original set, and it showed up periodically throughout the sets. But what it means is, I have a creature. It has Forest Walk. What this means to me is, let's say my opponent has a forest. My creature with Forest Walk cannot be blocked. Okay, let me explain this now a little bit. Let me take a step back. There is a land walk for all 5 basic lands. Plains Walk, Island Walk, Swamp Walk, Mountain Walk, Forest Walk. So, land walking is a sort of group of abilities all set under the same purview. They could have sometimes special land walks, like something could say like non-basic land walk if you had a non-basic land. So Forest Walk, that's my example. So my guy can't be blocked if it has that land walk and the defending player has that land. That's what it means. It's another offensive ability. If my creature has a land walk and that my opponent has that land under their control out in front of them, my creature cannot be blocked. It means no matter what, it just can't be blocked. You can do nothing to stop it from hitting your opponent. They can stop nothing from having it hit them with damage because they have those lands. So my opponent has forests, I have Forest Walk, they can't block it. The same is true for Island Walk, Swamp Walk, Mountain Walk, and Plains Walk. Which is a little joke there, because there's Plains Walkers, but Plains the land. Anyway, so, the only downside to a lot of land walking abilities is they tend to actually be from the color that gives them the ability. So if I have something with Island Walk, it's probably going to be blue. Forest Walk, green, Mountain Walk, red, and so on and so forth. That's the big disadvantage. Now, Forest Walk also happens to be the most common, followed by Island Walk, and then Mountain and Swamp Walk are pretty much around the same, and Plains Walk doesn't show up very much at all. Those are the land walks. Okay, that's enough for today. I've talked about 5 abilities. Next time, I'm going to have 5 more to talk about. We'll probably continue talking about abilities at Unlimited, because there's still some that showed up in Unlimited that have been around since then, and a couple of abilities that haven't been around since then. There are abilities that have showed up on creatures which you don't see them anymore. They just showed up in one set and were gone, or showed up in early sets and were gone. But we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk all about the creature abilities. Anyway, if you like this video, please leave a like, leave a comment. We're always, again, looking for more citizens, so subscribe to the channel, join us here. And until next time, I bid you farewell.